G'day guys, just a quick chat. It's a bit of a follow-up from a piece I just read where Jason Scott was interviewed, I think by Betsy. Can the Tote be saved? Jason to me is probably the person in Australia to listen to on, well, not just Tote, but all things betting. He's run racing Queensland. He's also run big corporate bookmaker operations across the world, not just in Australia. So he's very aware of the global ecosystem and landscape when it comes to betting, where racing sits in that. And where we could get to, and sort of what would spark up the economy, I guess, is the best way to put it. And whilst I think he's in a position to be, he's sort of been a little bit pragmatic about his suggestions. I'd love to see it a little bit more aggressive. That's probably the only way I'd put it. I'd say that all this money and fat that's being trimmed by merging the pools from 3 to 1. I'd love to see that money put back into the business. I know they do have shareholders and they have to answer to them, but for the long-term sustainability and growth of these tote pools, national tote, whatever you want to call it, I really do believe it has to be a very competitive betting product. And the only way that you can be that is to drop the takeout. At the moment it's about 115, 117. We're seeing the world pool, which is basically your opposition, is well north of that, and I would love to see it come in the other direction. I'd love to see it put pressure on the corporate bookmakers, fixed prices, come back to sort of 110, 112. I'd love to see the exotics drop from sort of 125 to sort of 110, 115, something like that too, and then you become a truly competitive global product that would be attractive to any offshore jurisdiction, punters offshore. No special rebates to selected clients who bet certain amounts. No discriminative dividends to recreational punters alone is probably an aggressive way to put it. Discriminative is probably the wrong word, but what I'm saying is that everyone's on a level playing field, and I think that's very important to the sustainability of this sort of system. I think if you bring it back to an aggressive level where everyone wants to play, where it makes sense for everyone to play, that's what you should be aiming for. As I said, it would put pressure back on the corporates. They'd, currently starting price sitting around that 117, 120%. They'd have to come lower to become competitive with the tote. If the tote dividends were always beating their starting prices, so that only makes sense to me. The other thing, forcing, I think Jason mentioned about 5% of the corporates take on exotics back into the pools. He would be more privy to the levels and the holds that they're currently operating. But I would love to see that sort of ramped up too. And the figure you want to get to is the figure where the pools are at a level that it makes sense for everyone to want to play again. So syndicates, recreationals, non-recreationals, semi-recreationals, professional punters, whatever you want to call them, all levels of punters, it makes sense for them to want to invest into the tote pool directly. At the moment, they're obviously at a level where it's very difficult to do that unless it's, magical days, big derby days, quadrillas, things like that, where, big Everest races, Caulfield Cups, Melbourne Cups, where the pools are huge and you're not going to make a dent on your own dividend, are the only days it really makes sense to play consistently now. So if we can pump enough of their hold back in, they're obviously going to get rewarded as heavily as possible too for doing that. And then it will grow naturally. Once it hits a level where it makes sense for other people to invest, it will continue to grow. And I think that's what we need to aim at, hitting those marks. And then you've also got, the possibility of building modern betting products or using existing betting products from around the world, modernising them, dropping takeouts on them as well. Your big draw cards for recreational punters are low investment for high potential returns. So your triple trios, your quadrillas, your first fours, your trifectas, if those pools are boosted and people are educated on how to bet into them, I think they'll only thrive as well. So, nothing groundbreaking, ground shaking here. What I'm just sort of suggesting is that they really look from the start to lower that takeout as aggressively as possible for so many reasons. And there's obviously red tape and costings behind it that it all has to make sense from their perspective as well. But if we can get it back to where what they're aiming for is the lowest margin possible with the highest turnover globally, I think that's what the industry needs to survive. And I just hope that that's what's in the forefront of their mind, that it's not about hiring, lifting the takeout to have more cream and really suggest that the recreationals don't care what they're getting, what dividend they're getting, they're going to bet anyway. I think it's very short-sighted, and I think the sort of the long game should be centered around high turnover for a lower margin. I think that sort of in this game is going to produce a much better outcome for everyone, punters and the industry alike, because it does fund the industry at the end of the day, and everyone wants to see a thriving industry across the board. Cheers, guys. Just my thoughts. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and this is just mine. But really just hope that they're on the same wavelength on this one, because I don't see a way forward if they go the way of the world pool, the world tote. Cheers, guys.